let's talk about how women handled their periods in the first part of the 19th century. Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin. I'm a living historian who educates other living historians by teaching old-fashioned sewing skills and copying original garments. A couple of years ago, I talked about how I handle my period at living history events, mostly 1850s and 1860s. And I will probably end up redoing that video in like a couple months or the next year or so. But I hadn't really delved into what was going on, how women handled their flow for really anything earlier than the 1850s. Now that I'm starting to do a lot more 1840s events, it's probably a good time to look into that. So we're going to start with looking at some images. I pulled a whole lot of resources last night, so this is going to be like less intensive of a research video because I already had the sources pulled. We'll just kind of look at them and decide, okay, here's what we're probably going to do. So we're going to start with my Pinterest page. Before we get started, this is most likely really going to be a 18 plus video. So if you have kids around or young children, you might want to watch it through before you watch it with them or let them watch it. Because we are going to be seeing some images of genitalia. All right, let's get started. We're going to look at some Pinterest images. So most of mine are going to be 1850s, 1860s. Those are the knitted ones. We are going to redo those pretty soon. This is the image I wanted to show. This is an 1820s image of man and woman in a compromising position. You can see that she has her cloth belt. And so this is really what we're going to be copying today. So it's just, there's a darker cord going around her waist. And then there is cloth going between her thighs. So that's more or less what we're trying to get at. Most of the time, that's just a Google search. Catamenial bandage is a good term for that. If you search T-bandage in quotes and then get menses, M-E-N-S-E-S, and do 1800 to like 1880, you get a lot of search that way when you go to advanced Google books. This is 1847's Diseases of Women. This is the first reference I found to a tampon, which I don't use those even in real life, so we're not doing that. But it just says that in severe cases when the gush of blood is almost instantaneous, we may employ temporarily mechanical means to prevent it. So it's not really something that was being used all the time, but it was more like for extreme cases. So called the tampon or plug. It can be made of linen, rag, cotton, or sponge in the form of a ball and introduced into the vagina like a pessary, which is like a plug. I think that's a pretty good term for it, actually. It must be large enough to completely fill up the passage, but it must not be introduced more than about 2 inches for fear of inflaming and for fear of irritating and inflaming the mouth of the womb, which is then very sensitive. So that would be the first term that I found for tampon. Let's see. Suspensory bandage, menses. There's like 1 or 2 sources for that. I came across it in like an 1800 source, but let's see where we got. So this is Principles and Practice of Obstetric Medicine. This is 1836. So let's just read what I found. I didn't read any of these. All I did was pull them up. So this is about this is an early one. This is the Principles of Surgery, and it's 1801. So this is pretty early, first part of the 19th century. So the T-bandage belonging to the groin or private parts is so continually used, while almost all under bandages are neglected, that it would be as superficious to explain it as it is useful to explain the others. I give no drawing of the T-bandage, which why? But in respect to all the others, I have acquitted myself in my duty towards you so as to be satisfied in some degree with what I have done. I find indeed that I have not entered so much in the history of the old forms of bandage as I once imagined I should need to do in order to make my own system intelligible. So essentially, like he has some illustrations, but it's not of the T-bandage. So this is in regards to surgery, severe injury down in the private area for both men and women. You will see this type of T-bandage. And as far as I can tell, that's why women started using it is, oh, this makes sense. Like this is a very logical way of handling it. They handle lots of blood and issues with surgery in the same manner. So it just makes logical sense that women would start doing it for their periods as well. So that just is my first reference to a T-bandage belonging to the groin area. So it could be that this thing is being used as early as 1801. It's kind of hard to tell. This talks about menstrual fluid and retained by a T-bandage. And this was 1835, North American Archives of Medical and Surgical Science. This actually takes place in 1833. So this is doctors using T-bandages to retain flows. But obviously we saw in that first image that was just a regular woman, so I doubt her doctor did that for her. How many ways are there actually to control blood in that area? I mean, really, you need something around the waist to hold it up, and you need something below to actually catch the blood and tissue and all of that. All right, T-bandage, a bandage so named from its shape. It is used to support dressing after certain surgical operations, and that would be 1842. So that's just a definition of a T-bandage, and we will see T-bandage being used again, as we did before, for menstruation. So that's just the definition of it. And this is the same thing. A bandage named from its shape. It is used to support the yes, literally the same definition. Where the discharge of blood takes place from urethra, a hemorrhage may be controlled by means of a T-bandage. So that's blood from where you urinate, not necessarily where blood comes out, because those are two different holes. So you can use a T-bandage for that too, but it's still using like T-bandage in that same area. So really we're just reinforcing, not necessarily it being used for periods, but this is just how things were handled when there are injuries and blood or something coming out of that area of a body, whether it's male or female. This is how it was handled in this time period. And it makes sense that that would be also used every day at home, because again, how many ways can you actually handle that? You must use a compress retained with a T-bandage. So that one, yeah, principles of midwifery, including diseases of women and children, since 1820. So this is using a T-bandage with a compress, which I liked this source in particular, even though it's not necessarily about periods, because I'm a heavy bleeder. And so whenever I use my period system, I tend to not just use the T-bandage, which I use the mid-19th century knitted one with the twill tape ties around the waist. I also take rags like a compress and use the T-bandage to hold it in place. So this is the first reference I found to that sort of idea of using a compress retained with a T-bandage to contain any leakage. All right, this is another earlier one, isn't it? Yep, because the S's are shaped like F's. Okay, Encyclopedia Britannica. Oh, I did forget to look at the year. There's no way that's 1968. I bet it's 1768. Ugh. So 1771, I guess. The first reference I've seen to habit of body, which usually refers to, it could refer to general cleanliness, but usually it refers to bathroom habits. So, like you could say a 1-year-old has poor habits of body. That means they're not really soiling or wetting themselves. They have good clues that they're about to go, so the parents can get a chamber pot ready. That's usually what that means. So, sure, I don't look as much in the 18th century, so it's just nice to see. I was looking for, oh, here it is, T-bandage. Linen dipped in warm spirits of wine. Ooh. Leeches can be applied. And dressings must be made with lint, which compresses, and the T-bandage. So dressings and a T-bandage. This is the term I found for suspensory bandage. She had never used one. So I was looking into that, but it didn't seem to be used much for periods. Like I didn't get a lot more hits other than this one. And this one says it has plates. So this one is the brief description of surgical apparatus, and it's 1832. And it keeps saying there's plates and figures, and I looked all up and down this book, and there are no plates, and there are no figures, and it's making me kind of upset because it says that there are plates and figures, and I don't see plates and figures, and I want to see how all this stuff looks like. But I've looked through this entire thing like 4 times, like last night when I was looking. But it talks about T-bandages, and it shows you like how to make them, and I was really looking forward to seeing the plates, but clearly there are, well, we're about halfway through, there are no plates. But it's basically just how to make various dressings. I'm wondering if I find a different version of this, if maybe this particular book the plates were taken out. Bandages, so you have the single roller, double-headed roller. Okay, the T-bandage is made by stitching a broad band divided longitudinally upon the middle of a short roller at right angles, acts as a confining bandage for the dressings to the anus and perineum. It is also applied with a compress, to prevent a second descent of the gut after reduction of a prolapse ani. A roller is intended to surround the waist, and a band descended from the loins, and the divided ends being brought up along on each side of the scrotum to be pinned to the rollers in front. In a single T-bandage, the vertical band is undivided. A particular form of this bandage is used for confining dressings between the fingers and toes, and in burns and scalds on the hands and feet. All right, I am going to look up this book again. These plates are weird. Sometimes they are at the beginning of the book, sometimes they're at the very end of the book, sometimes they're inserted between chapters, and so you'll get that chapter's plates at the chapter. Sometimes they're all in the middle of the book. It's just, you never know. Sometimes you have to look at different versions of it. That's just page 1. That does not help me. Oh, there it goes. It takes a second. Okay. But there have to be plates. It's just whether or not the online versions of them have the plates. But there has to be plates. It keeps talking about plates and figures. I just want to see it without the dress getting in the way. Yeah, I don't think it actually exists. Did we go through all of this? No. Okay, cool. This is where we are. So, yeah, this one was Philadelphia Practice of Midwifery. It's 1838, and it says, in health of menses return with surprising regularity. The great majority of women expect it with utmost confidence on a certain day of the week or month, making preparations for its reception accordingly, frequently modifying their arrangements of business or pleasure by its indications. If she goes out or to bed, the woman makes ready for its reception by applying the napkin used as a T-bandage to impede, but for such precaution would frequently soil her dress or expose her to deep mortification by falling down to the ground. For it should be remarked that the discharge in a good many subjects appears suddenly and is quite free from the first moment, whereas in general it commences by slow degrees, increasing in abundance at the end of the first day and declining to the last. Among the thousands of females who are seen in the streets of a populous city, how rare is the occurrence of even the slightest exposure of their state from soiling or staining any part of their dress, which leads me to infer that even the most loose and reckless woman retain the latent spark of modesty upon this point, amid the wreck of morals and the greatest depths of degradation and misery. So that's basically, yeah, it's a napkin used as a T-bandage. So that's almost saying there is a compress. There's a napkin. It just says the napkin used as a T-bandage. So that would be, a napkin can be like a napkin. It can just be, is this a British source or is this Philadelphia? Well, I knew that. So yeah, it's American. So I doubt that it's talking about a diaper. So like, and the Brits tend to still call what we would call diapers napkins. I don't think it's that, because even by this point, America is pretty solidified in the fact that diaper is a diaper and the Brits are, that's a napkin. So I don't think it's that, but it would have to go from about your navel up to your center back, or the lower part of your back, through your legs. I'm going to have to measure in a little bit, but that would usually be more than a napkin. Now, napkins were bigger than we usually have them today. Usually we have pretty small napkins now. Theirs were more in the 18 to like 25 inch range. So maybe, but maybe this is just meaning napkin as in something to collect the blood, but used as a T-bandage. So that's good reference to that in the 1830s. Encyclopedia, or a Universal Dictionary of Art, Science and Literature. T-bandage is so called from its resembling the letter in shape. It consists of 2 bands of linen. Okay, that's good to know. 2 bands of linen. Oh, did I see what era this is? 1819. Fantastic. Okay, I love the earlier ones. 2 bands of linen of greater or lesser breadth according to the circumstances. The transverse piece of the bandage serves to go around the body above the hips. That's what we saw in the image. The perpendicular portion is sewed at one of its ends to the middle and back point of the band, okay, which surrounds the pelvis. Its other or anterior extremity generally fits into 2 portions or tails about 6 or 8 inches in length. The perpendicular piece of the T-bandage applies itself in between the glutae muscles and the perineum, while the 2 tails, which we have just now described, are carried between the thighs and the predenda to the right and left, and are lastly fastened to the transverse piece which surrounds the body. Besides the common T-bandage, Surgeons make use of another, which they call double. Okay, we've already read about that. T-bandage admits the application also in other modes where the crossband is broad and may be applied to the sheath. Okay, so I'm not seeing two tails in the illustration, so I don't think that part is going to apply to us. But it is nice to know that's 2 bands of linen. Now hers, the upper one is darker, so whether that's just a like a band of some sort, or it's maybe leather, or it could be a lot of different things. Not gonna be rubber in the 1820s, but it could be a couple of different things. Could just be scrap fabric. I know why the other end, the front end, is set into 2 parts, because usually that fits around the scrotum. I've seen an illustration of that. So that part makes sense. So that's for a guy. But how do we attach it? Do we sew it to the front? In which case we have to take the entire thing off to use the restroom. Which isn't that big of a deal, but it is kind of annoying. And I've done it. It's just annoying. Other option would be to, like the 1850s and 60s, have a little loop in the fabric with like a buttonhole stitch. And that way I can take it off and just like slide it over without having to take the whole thing off. But then usually the whole thing kind of just falls out anyway, so you might as well just sew it to both ends, I think. This one I thought was interesting because it just talks about, it's talking to students. Women while menstruating usually apply a napkin in the form of a T-bandage as a receiver. We can judge pretty correctly concerning the amount by learning how many receivers are necessary from the beginning to the ending of each menstruation. I believe it will be safe as a general rule to allow an ounce of blood to each separate receiver, so that if only 6 be required, we can assume the patient loses about 6 ounces. If 12 or 18 changes are considered necessary, then we may conclude that she does lose some 12 or 18 ounces of blood monthly. So that is, I thought that was interesting. Perennial cravat, which seems to also be, this is a little bit later too, isn't it? 1884, yeah, okay, I don't know why that one's here. Brief description, that's the same thing. Surgical apparatus, we saw it before. Yes, and that's just me searching. Okay, so it looks like we're going to be using linen. I don't know if I have quite enough thick linen. I probably do. I would prefer linen diaper for this, but I don't have any. So I think we're just going to use the thickest linen I have. You can't really tell. It's almost folded in on itself. I wonder if I could fold it in such a way where it wouldn't be necessary to hem it. If I did all the ends on the inside and then folded it in such a way. And this one I can see the band goes through. So it's almost like we are taking the band, folding it over and stitching it down. And it's fairly thick. It's pretty thick. And I'm wondering if instead of sewing it, like you could sew it. We have the T-bandage descriptions of them being sewn. But this one clearly has it just with a little hole to admit it. So I'm wondering if we do that in the front and back. And that way we can have more of the ones that go between the legs to change them out. But we don't have to have as many ones that go around. All right, I think we have a good plan. So let's go ahead and figure out what fabric I have, what we want to do for this, and get started on the actual project. All right, so I have the thickest linen that I have in my stash. I have some linen twill tape. It's about the width it looks like the original is, and it's fairly thin, so I want to try one band like this. Then I have this cotton twill tape that linen's going to be stronger and harder wearing than cotton, so ideally like that would be ideal. But I want to try one that's a double layer and thicker because I think it's going to sit better. So I want to try one of each. So we'll make 2 bands. In fact, I should probably just go ahead and cut them. They only need to be about as wide as your waist plus some. So on the mid-19th century ones, they button, and I think that's what we're going to do because buttons are appropriate. And I find that having 2 buttons works out really well. So I'm going to take my bloated waist measurement. I would highly suggest doing this type of measuring when you're actually on your cycle if you're going to do this, because you're going to get more accurate measurements on where your body is going to be. Also, if you take it wearing your corset, it's going to be very helpful. And that's all we really have to do for the band so far. I am going to sew this in half with just a whip stitch, but we're going to set this to the side and do the other cutting first. I'm going to deal with some linen that is stained already because it makes more sense that way. So it may actually be real napkins that they're using, or at least maybe really old napkins, because the Workwoman's Guide has napkins being around 27 to 32 inches long. I measured myself from my belly button to the very bottom of my back, from like right here, right where my waist sits, through and between my legs, up to right here at the small of my back. And I was 34 inches, and I have a stomach, so maybe 32 would actually work for a lot of people. But I have 34. I also need to make sure I have enough of a fold over to admit my tape on both ends. So let's say that's 3 inches, that's 6 more inches, plus seam allowance, so 7 inches. So that's 41 inches that I need to cut them. If you just stitch them to the back of this, you wouldn't need all that excess seam allowance. You probably could use an actual 19th century napkin size. And this is going to be fairly narrow. I think we're going to do a couple of layers instead of doing a square, because I would really like to get some use out of this linen that is just stained, and that we've washed it a couple of times. And it looks like I'm going to do 2 of these. It's going to make 1 napkin, because if we're doing squares, like napkins usually are squares, so I'm going to make one that's an actual square. The other one's just going to be using scraps, which would make sense too. I only have 2 of the 1850s ones, and that works out well for me, so I don't think I need a ton. I may reevaluate when I get closer to the event. If it's like a 3-day event and I'm going to be on my period all 3 days, then yeah, I definitely reevaluate. Right, I'm going to iron these, and then we'll work out how we're going to fold it in nicely where all the raw edges are in, so there's going to be very little sewing involved. And we'll figure out how I'm going to put these together the best I can to match the image. It may not be exactly right because I've never seen one in person, but we're going to get the image copied. Alright, this is my slightly wider one, so we're going to put this one on the outside. So we'll do the half one first. Put this one in the middle. And I'm thinking fold in, oh, actually do this one first because this is the raw edge. Folding in like in thirds. They may be slightly wider than what she had, but not all that bad. And that's a selvage edge, so that can stay. This can be evened out. That's a good, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of linen. That's pretty decent. I'm going to iron this really well, and then we're going to fold in. Oops, that's just a little bit off. It's going to be really thick. We'll fold that in, and then we'll do our little 2 inches that we said to give ourselves that little back portion, and do the same at the front as well. So I wonder what would happen if I folded in half and in half again and fold that. Seems decently thick. And that seems to be right about the right width. That is 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 8 layers of linen. That would be fairly absorbent, I think, at that level. I'm going to iron this down. I fold that in a little bit. And of course, I'll fold it in like that on either end. But I'm going to iron this down. And then I have a big old bunch of bone buttons. I'm going to grab some thicker thread to sew on this. And all we really have to do is sew the loops, I suppose, at the end of the ones that go underneath. And the bands here I have to stitch in. I'd probably finish these ends actually. And then sew in buttons and sew in buttonholes. So it's a very light sewing project. Alright, that took less than an hour to have completely hand sewn menstrual pads. So let's go and just show you how they work. I put a black background so you can actually hopefully sort of see it. And I find this to be the hardest part, is just stuffing this through the hole. Which is why usually I just leave them in the back and I only take them out for the front. But this would of course go between your legs. It comes out like this. It's like a giant diaper essentially. And for me, because I don't like the buttons to be like in the middle there where they're hidden, when I wear the other one, like the later style, I just put the buttons off to the side like this. So they're easy to get to still, but they're not covered. I mean, you can do it either way. I don't think it really matters. But that's the part that goes around the waist. It's a little bit more compact. Smaller size. Which means it's going to be easier to get the belt through. But that is essentially a T-bandage. They're really easy projects. Obviously something that's not going to ever be seen. It's very discreet, so obviously not a ton of work is going to get put into it. You can see this one's not as sturdy, like you can see it bending in half. This one is actually staying together because it's thicker. And to be fair, this isn't twill tape, this is just a woven tape. It is linen, which is why I chose it, but it's not a twill tape. A twill tape would be thicker. It's always one of those things where people are always curious on how you handle something during that time of the month. I think most people expect you not to have an answer for it, at least in my experience as a living historian. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, I wonder how they handled this. And I'm over here going, like, do you want an answer or are you just like wondering out loud? Because I have the answer. It just depends on, do you actually want to hear it? But we have to remember that people back then are not stupid. They were human beings, and what they did worked best for them in their time, in their place, in their culture, and with their technology available to them. Nothing's going to be extensively difficult or frustrating or inconvenient. And this is basically what it would look like. And this is one of those things where linen is super strong wearing. You have some linen napkins laying around and you're a little bit smaller than me. You could probably do an actual napkin and fold it several times and put it in there. I was just a little bit too big to do that, so I had to make larger squares. But there's so many things that you would have squares of linen, old sheets. Oh, here comes nutmeg. Old tablecloths with, stains. All of that can be ripped up and made into things like this. So it doesn't need to be necessarily new fabric. And I was just fortunate that I happened to have some linen that I was cutting around the stains for other projects, so this worked out great for me just to use things that otherwise I likely wouldn't have used because giant stains. Well, that one wasn't the big one. I think I hid the biggest parts on the inside. But white's easy to bleach. I could reuse these over and over and over again. Linen isn't going to wear out like cotton wears, so these will last me probably a decade or so. Probably more than that because I really don't attend too many events this early, so we're talking maybe once or twice a year I'll be using them. So this will likely last me the rest of my menstruating life and probably still has some life left in them. But that was fun. I think we are going to end up doing another video in a couple of months, maybe early next year, something like that, of where we do the later or the mid 19th century. It'll be like 1850s through the 1880s. Do another one of the knitted bands because I think I lost one and I like to have two, so we'll make another one. I'll show you how all that works again now that I have better quality equipment and maybe you can hear me a little bit better and all that. I'm also not one of the weird people who thinks that you have to do your period the period correct way. I mean, as long as it's discreet and no one notices, I certainly don't care what you do, and I don't think there's anyone, even event coordinators, who actually care what you're doing as long as there's no evidence of it. I mean, you can use a cup, you can use modern disposable pads. It doesn't matter. If there's a place for you to keep all of that, not a problem. I just find personally that when I'm at an event, it's easier for me to do what they did as long as it's safe and available, because if it worked for them, then clearly me pretending to be them, it's going to work for me. That's my philosophy on it, and that's why I do things like this. And also just for the education aspect. And I like being able to wear these things and experience them and then be able to talk about the pros and cons compared to what we do today. I don't foresee there being too many cons for this. I have found with my knitted ones that I have to have the compress in there. I probably will with these two. And I've learned to wrap the compress around, as otherwise sometimes it will like fall out because the knitted band isn't very thick. This is thicker than the knitted band, which I think will help a lot. But yeah, that was definitely something I had to learn. And that's one of the reasons I like doing this, is I like learning the things that no one's ever going to write about. Anyway, if you've enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe to the channel, click that little bell notification so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. And as always, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next video.